We've got a real heavy hitter today that I really wanted to speak to you guys. He's a really, when I talk about all the money guys in the industry and who's raising what and what's happening and all the venture funds, there's one group that really stands out among the rest, Arcadian, and we're fortunate enough to have the founder of Arcadian here to, who's basically been through it all and now can talk about what's the analogy for foreign and international markets and what's happened domestically. We're really lucky to have him here. He's a former quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles, and he is an extremely accomplished young man. He's only 37 years old, and I'm really excited to have him here. Please, everyone give it up for Mr. Matt Nordgren. You guys, you happy to be here? Make some noise. Give it up.
Oh, great to be here, Alex. Thank you. Wonderful event you put on here, bringing so many great people together. Feel privileged to have the opportunity to speak to you today. I want to also thank ICBC, the staff. I've had an opportunity to meet several of you now in different venues. You do a great job. And Berlin, wow, thank you for hosting this and having us. Really fun experiment yesterday, which was put on some Nikes and just ran around the city. Had never been here before. Really excited to just get in the culture and ask people questions. The first thing that struck me was just the amount of construction here. I mean, it's insane how much is being built, right? One can only attribute that to potential tax revenue from cannabis, I guess. And then Alex told me this has been going on 20 years. So it's a really interesting environment, one that I think will benefit from our industry a lot, just like the rest of the world, and like to see Berlin taking that step. My name is Matt Nordgren. I run a fund called Arcadian. I exist in a private equity group running a large family office out of Los Angeles, which years ago we determined we were in the right place at the right time. And sitting here today, feel pretty good about that fact. Think California is a market that we can prove businesses at scale. The name of the fund, why Arcadian? It means rustic or rural, which applies, but also to proceed without worry, which I think all of us in here have a certain level of confidence that you need, and I think as investors you have to have even additional confidence when you're putting a lot of dollars to work in this space. One really interesting question I'd like to pose to the group here, just so I can get a little bit of an idea who we have in the room, but I think also for the rest of the room. Raise your hand if you are involved in running an opportunity or operating a business. Wow, great, about half the room. Thank you. What about how many people in here are in search of an opportunity or investing into an opportunity or a group of people that are really good at something? Raise your hand, please. Wow, good number of investors. Okay, everyone who raised their hand first, turn around and figure out who those guys are. We've officially started dating. You just have to know who's who. Right. And so for me, knowing what kind of audience you have is really important too, and it sounds like we've got a pretty diverse group. In fact, Alex told me I think there's 40 countries represented here. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. Really excited to have such a big group of people, but I think you can boil it down to investors and guys who have opportunities. Good to see there's both here. In my walking around in Berlin yesterday, another thing happened. I was looking for a gift to bring home and ended up buying this book that was on Jesus and God. I couldn't read it because it's not in my language, but ultimately I knew what that story was, so I felt like it was kind of a fun gift to bring home. During doing that, the guy asked me what I was in Berlin for, because I had said I was never here and told him why I was buying this gift. I said, I'm here for cannabis business. And he told me, he said, you're buying a God book and you're in the cannabis business? That doesn't seem right. And it was an interesting point because I got to explain to the guy that even in the Bible, there's about 11 or 12 verses that in some way talk about this plant being something that would be acceptable with words like, what's put on this earth is meant for the consumption of mankind, right? This was not designed by us. Interesting conversation there, which led to something else that I want to talk about. Before I get into the business of cannabis, why are we all here? We're here because there's something about this plant that actually works and resonates with people. What is that? What is the opportunity? Let's strip everything away and talk about why this works. It's because that plant, which was given to us from the dawn of inception, you could take everything back to algae, fungi, bacteria. You can reverse engineer this stuff and figure that out. I am a God guy personally, but I think science is pretty well proven that we all came from algae, fungi, and bacteria in the very early stages of all civilization that we know today. This plant happens to produce something that our body naturally produces, and that's the cannabinoids, right? So if you think about this, it's so natural. It works with our body perfectly like a puzzle piece that exists in the world that is created naturally that can do wonderful things for us. So I think you have to think about this business and really strip away down to the science, what is the plant? And the plant is a technology. People think of this as going to be commoditized one day, and maybe the whole plant ends up being somewhat of a commodity and prices drop. But the plant technology, the science, the bioscience, the chemical properties in the makeup that make up the plant are where the real opportunity is. Figuring out how each of those interact with the human body and what you can do to benefit the world off the back of it. Really interesting story that I think you guys would enjoy. One of our big investors got married in the Vatican recently, and in order to do that, you actually have to disclose everything about your life to get approval to be married in the Vatican. He had to disclose the fact that he produced a large amount of cannabis. Very interesting point. From the Pope's office issued a statement that the Pope has no problem with cannabis. This is like I can't wait for this to hit the papers, and I'm one of the owners of High Times and Cannabis Cup, and I hope we get to publish it, but this is a fact. This just came back. He was allowed to get married in there, and the official statement was, in moderation. We think about cannabis just like we do alcohol and tobacco. Great! I can't wait to go back to Texas and tell all my Christian conservative Republicans there that story. The point of all of this is, before we can really understand the business, I think you have to understand what this plant is, what it can do at the science level, where the plant came from, and why it's been withheld from us for so many years. It's not created that way. It's business, it's pharma, it's politics. There's other reasons that haven't allowed it to be available. Now the world has a voice, and it will be. What are you going to do to capitalize on that opportunity while doing a great thing? In talking about some of those cannabinoids, there's about 125 or so in the plant. We still don't really know. A lot of research has to happen for us to feel comfortable, but I think that's coming, and we haven't had the resources to do it, which we now are. THC, CBD, we talk about a lot in here. What are the ramifications of those two isolated cannabinoid molecules? Don't forget about CBC, CBG, CBGA, CBNs, THCA, THCV, CBDA. Every one of these has a tremendous effect on the body. CBV, appetite suppressant. It's one of my favorite things to talk to new cannabis people that want to learn about the plant. There's actually an appetite suppressant molecule in there. Like, who would have thought of that? But that exists. So what is the opportunity? I see the cannabis opportunity in three main phases. The first phase, and every market sort of that we've studied starts this way and kind of grows at its own pace depending on politics, but eventually they all kind of grow the same way. In order for there to be an industry, have to have cultivation, have to have some sort of retail, and have to manufacture it. I see that as always as phase number one. As that starts to scale, which we see now in the United States and through Canada, we're starting to see consolidation. You eventually do see prices respond accordingly, which would be decrease. Phase 2, which I think happens just after you create the basic fundamentals of a new industry, is the servicing aspect. Once you have the plant in your market, once you have a place you can buy it, whether it's physician or a retail establishment, what about the data? How do we understand our consumer? What about customer retention? How do we continue to use that information to service our customers? What about media, events? What about different kinds of software that exist in every other industry? With the stigma around this one, those big companies don't feel comfortable addressing the cannabis industry until a point in time. So I think you have a second wave of opportunity in the servicing and ancillary category. The third ends up being off the back of that. Once everything gets figured out in the industry, the machine's built, now you have brands, all sorts of opportunities off the back end. I kind of think about it like gold mining, right? It's a typical example you hear a lot in this industry. Go back to the gold miners, right? There has to be gold for there to be a business, right? Without cannabis, we don't, or cannabinoids, however you get them, we don't have a business. But ultimately, those gold miners need picks and shovels and boots and jeans in order to function. Levi Jeans, for example, started that way and is still around. Then ultimately, you have to have a consumer for the gold. You got to have a ring. You got to have a watch, right? So I think cannabis industry can be seen in similar phases. You have to have the gold. You have to have ways to run the business. And then you got to ultimately have a variety of consumers to utilize the product. Within those categories, I think you have 3 additional markets to address, which is medical. We talk a lot about that in here today because this is a medical market. You have the over-the-counter market, nutraceuticals. And then you have recreational. We've seen this evolve in every market as well. Similarly to the different phases of the industry that grow in the market, you end up having regulations set in that typically put products in those 3 categories. If you can meet a certain level of regulation, no pesticide problems, things like that, and you don't have any further study, well now, you probably have a recreational product that you can infuse in anything in the grocery store based on a very low hurdle of regulation. The next hurdle might be such that you have an over-the-counter product that you can charge a little bit more for, has gone through a certain level of study, but ultimately not enough to be qualified as true medical product. True medical product will be the 3rd category where you have to go through a rigorous amount of clinical trial research and study in order to be approved at that level of regulation. So I think you ultimately also see a variety of levels of product. What does that ultimately mean? I think that means that every person on planet Earth is a cannabinoid consumer one day. No disrespect to Henry Rollins, who said he's never touched it before earlier. No disrespect to the gentleman who was just here who hasn't smoked in 20 years. But I do think that everybody, when they understand the science of this and they understand where the industry is going, I do think you will see cannabinoid in every product in every grocery store in America. Think about B12. What's B12? Well, you all love it. Omega, fish oil, all these wonderful things that have been proven to do some pretty interesting effects for the human body will happen in cannabis too. Those cannabinoids I mentioned earlier. You might see C23. Who knows what they're going to brand it as, but it'll pass a certain level of regulation. If it's just medical, it'll be a certification you could put on a product. Because you can isolate it and extract it, now you can infuse it in literally anything in the grocery store, then you can put that brand on it. So I do think that everybody has it. Cannabis is the new salt, somebody said in one of my last speeches, and I thought that was actually pretty interesting to think about it this way, right? I mean, fungi, there's actually 10 times more amount of fungi on planet Earth than there are plants. People don't realize the symbiotic relationship that the fungi has in the roots with the delivery of oxygen and nutrients and all those other things. Cannabinoid is a very basic human element that we produce ourselves that we can naturally get from the environment. So I think you have to look at how big this industry can be, and I do think it will be everywhere in the world at some level. How to go about investing in this space? That's the question we had to ask ourselves. In phase one, things that require a license, things that touch the plant, we felt that the opportunity for that is in some markets and most markets federally illegal, not something we could do in the family office. So we decided to look at phase two, which was those businesses that get built around it. What we decided to do from that standpoint was focus on companies that have been around for a number of years and have revenue growth and can certify that they are in compliance with federal law. So we became a good place for the industry's most successful ancillary companies to come to in order to receive capital, but also a big private equity firm's experience on what it means to provide growth equity, and then how do you prepare yourself for the next phase. A lot of our companies are starting to mature. High Times will have an offer on NASDAQ very soon. Similar thesis with the rest of our companies. You get a company that's at scale, get liquidity, get public currency, have some form of consolidation, and then you go out and try to provide capital and other resources to other businesses in that same vertical in order to scale. High Times has no, it doesn't think it's the end-all, be-all for everybody. It services a very specific type of cannabis customer. But the good news is if you subscribe to the theory that cannabinoids is the future, then that means every single person fits in the cannabinoid category and everybody has a different profile. So everyone has to be catered to differently. Now High Times can provide capital to those companies and ultimately let them all grow and service various demographic and geographic regions. So I think you're going to see a lot of consolidation in this industry. You're seeing it right now on the plant touching side. I think valuations are as high as they'll be over this next year or two. And then I think you see 2, 3, 4 years after that, consolidation of all the ancillary companies. And then 2, 3 years after that, I think you start to see consolidation of brands. One interesting thing I think I always try to point out, based on all the things we've been talking about, the wide use of this plant, is that everybody's skill set is transferable to cannabis. There is so much business opportunity, and those of us that have gotten in it early, I think, have the most likelihood of success. But ultimately, we want to encourage everybody to be in this industry, whether you're a graphic designer, a tomato farmer, a finance person. This industry requires all of us in order to make it work. The one thing I can say based on that is that I think the companies and the people that I've seen not do well are the ones that aren't very niche focused. It's very easy to get distracted in this industry because there's a lot of great things to do. But I do think, what we're looking for and we're investing in a company is somebody who's solving a very specific problem at a very high level, right? There is no regulated business in the entire world that you can do everything. They regulate it for a reason, and it will be separated into various points along the supply chain. I think this industry will be the exact same, mostly because they like to tax it, but they also like to just regulate it and keep control of things. So I think you have to solve specific pain points. You have to be really, really, really good at something. I don't think you can do it all. And our companies and our CEOs have been proven to do that very well. What are some of those companies? Well, I kind of break the industry down into a few segments. You have production, you have cultivation, you have manufacturing, phase one. The ones that we like to look at in the second phase are business software, business services, social media, online media, print media, vaporizers and accessories, production equipment and supplies, HR, data. There's an immense amount of industry that needs to come into cannabis in order for it to grow properly. Those are the type of companies we're looking for. What's interesting enough that happens is these companies that are a couple years down the road, for example, let's use a company called BDS Analytics that we're involved with. They're a point of sale data company. Point of sale data exists everywhere else. But it doesn't exist in this space because the big players, Nielsen in the United States, for example, doesn't feel comfortable servicing the space. So I can go into a company and look at a company that's got 2-3 years of proven revenue that I think is probably worth a 10, 12, 15 multiple based on what happens if you're not servicing cannabis and Nielsen was going to buy you, for example. But because they service cannabis for a proven business, we'll get a 5 multiple, 6 multiple, 7 multiple. We basically get a 50% discount on a proven business that has no legal constraints. And if we guess right and that company ends up being the market winner, when Nielsen and those companies are ready to buy, I guarantee you they're big enough they don't care the price. They know they have to have market share and they'd be willing to buy the market. So then you have to ask yourself what companies aren't attractive on an exit and what are, and that's ultimately a fund manager and an investment committee's decision to try to sort through. For example, banking. Banking's a major pain point. Insurance, major pain point. The likelihood that those don't get solved is very low. Also, the likelihood that they want to buy an insurance or a bank business that's been around a couple years in cannabis is also pretty low because they'll be able to offer those exact same products. So from an investment standpoint, we decided not to pursue those because of that factor. Although they are pain points, lots of pain points, just have to figure out the ones that ultimately have value at the end of the day. Want to leave some time for some questions, but why am I up here talking to you about all this? I think the answer probably is because if you're going to have chips in this space, everybody in here probably has a unique skill set or a reason why they're in it. Having exposure to a fund, which I run one, there's multiple great funds. There's another investment group here, Nick, who's speaking tomorrow. His group's great. There's about 10 other funds in the United States I think are at our level. All of them can give you exposure to the space in a hedged way, can get you access to lots of great resources and brain power, ultimately only making whatever it is you decide to do a better strategy by having a big shop with the machine built around you to help grow that business. So I hope you do decide to talk to somebody who runs a big investment shop, but focus on this space, because I do think it helps everybody with whatever they're trying to do individually. Really excited to be here again. I want to make one last point, which is I'm a whole plant guy, and I love the whole plant people. And I'll never change, right? That's sort of how I came into the industry, is being that type of consumer. But look at the United States market. It's estimated there's about 25 million consumers of cannabis in the United States market. 325 million people there. So if we have an objective to get this plant in the hands of every single person, we're going to have to understand what that means. If this room had 100 people, based on the American numbers today, which is a pretty good market to scale, 13% are current users or potential users of the flower. So we need to service that community. That's a lot of people. 25 million is a big number, but there's 300 million other people that will be new consumers. How will they be introduced to the cannabinoid? If you walked in a room with 100 people, 87 other people, would be very tough to say, hey, you should come to cannabis and just roll up this plant and smoke it. Now, a guy like me probably would try to argue that, but ultimately it's about making sure that everybody has a product that they're comfortable with. So those other 87% of the people, what are we going to create for them? Is it an edible? Is it topical? Is it a sublingual? I don't know, but the important thing is that everybody has access to this cannabinoid. Whole plant and business guys that are trying to find other ways to do that, I hope we can all have the same mission, which is move this industry forward. Thank you for having me. I'm Matt.
So there's time for 2 more additional questions. I think then the next panel is already starting. So are there any questions? Okay. Perfect.
Hi, Hendrik Kretschwim. Where are we currently in Europe? if you compare the US to Europe in terms of private equity or venture capital?
Great question. And the opportunity for investment funds is really there because of the institutional investors aren't really in the space yet. So I think even in America, you don't have that. For Europe, you're in phase one, right? You're trying to still figure out how you're going to grow it, where you're going to sell it, how it's going to be manufactured. So you're kind of in that first phase. So depending on the market, the opportunity is just where the market dictates. Mexico, we help write Mexico's policy. We know there's a handful of families that are about to be announced that have that. They're at square one. They're going to import from Canada for 6 to 9 months. The likelihood that they need services is not very high right now. It's a few years down the road. So I think in Europe, you're steps beyond that, but you're getting to the point now where you want to understand data, right? We heard people talk today about Germany. There's a business here and there's 20,000, but no one knows the data behind them. So I think the opportunity in Europe is you can still get your hands on great licensed businesses at a decent price, and you can be on that side of the business. But I do think the real opportunity is in the next wave of businesses. You can't even find hardly a vape pen in Europe. It's so crazy, right? In California, which is the other benefit actually about being in California. You can test businesses across every vertical in this industry at scale, right? So you have 35 million people, you have 200-something million that come through there every year. We've got a great market to test any philosophy at massive scale to see if it's going to work. So we like to use California as a bit of a testing ground, which I think we've done. And then I think the next step for us, we are launching a European fund right now in order to take everything we've built here into the European market off the back of the growth of the basic part of the industry.
So there would be time for one more question. Is there? Okay, last question, please.
Francesco, Empress Pharmaceuticals, Switzerland. I got a question, but it's not for pharma stuff. Because actually, we're talking since the beginning about just the business of the buds, the extracts, everything, but we're not speaking about the opportunities on the business on the whole plant, Because actually, the point is, you might know it, financially speaking, actually, as well for design, as well for materials, bioplastics, and fuels, and there's a lot of opportunities, not just on buds. Mm-hmm. The hemp is like pork. You can take out everything you want, even the roots. We can say, over here in Europe, with the sun, most in the south, we can say that actually the plants reach 4 meters height, right? Even 5, even 7. So the roots are really big. So right. You can even take wood out of it, really.
Right.
Wood. So you can make everything out of it. So the financial potency of the business should not be just concentrated into buds, but everywhere else. Because there's a lot of job to do. There's a lot of work to do as well. A lot of my friends are working in Europe and as well worldwide to develop a lot of materials, new material, right. New resins, new stuff to do bio things. So that will be really huge stuff to do if everybody over here, just fix a second on it.
I think that's part, without going into all the business opportunities, that's exactly what I'm trying to express up here, which is the massive amount of opportunities and just what you're talking about. In fact, I have a friend in the industry who actually put together a business plan, and I don't know if it got in front of him or not, but he's trying to put it in front of the White House to say, hey, if you're going to build a wall, why don't you do it out of hempcrete at least, right? Like do some, and it's a bit of a joke, but again, right, if we could ever get there, who knows? But hey, laughter is the best form of medicine. Cannabis certainly could be a medicine in that regard. But I agree with you, and I think that we should all walk away with that thought that there is so much business opportunity. It's not just whole plant. That's the people who are advocating it today understand whole plant benefit to them, But as this industry moves forward, I challenge you all to think about, what does the consumer look like today? What does it look like tomorrow? And what does it look like 5 and 10 years from now? Because it's a completely different answer. And understanding what hemp can do with its byproducts, understanding, you know, the cannabinoid profiles and what each of them can do, that's where the industry is going. So if anybody in here is running a business that's at scale, that meets our criteria, I'd love to know you. We're looking for great opportunities. We've been able to raise a significant amount of capital. A lot of people want exposure to this space. We've got great, smart people that are happy to help dig through all those opportunities. If you're looking for exposure to the space, we are a committed capital fund and always keeping that open. So love to talk to you about that too. My email is matt@Arcadian Fund. Really thank you for all your time, and just love everybody's passion and enthusiasm in here for this industry.
Give it up for Matthew with the Arcadian Fund. Matt Nordgren.